Gas or electric, the new BMW 5 Series has both options, and today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of each, and we're also going to get both of these cars out on the road and see how they drive. Now, the new BMW 5 Series has, like I mentioned, both gas and electric powertrains, and the range starts with those gas powertrains. Here what we have is a BMW 530i. This is the base powertrain, and there we have the BMW M60. That is the top-of-the-line battery powertrain. Now, starting with this base gas powertrain, what you get, if I pop the hood here, is a 2-liter 4-cylinder with turbo, and that gets you 255 horsepower. So it's really not a bad option to start with. Popping the hood, obviously you don't see a lot of the motor, you see mostly plastic, but promise, under there is a 2-liter 4-cylinder. Now, this particular 530i is also paired with xDrive, so it's all-wheel drive, but if you want a little bit more power, what you can do is you can opt up for the 540i. Now, the naming would suggest that a 540 would be a 4-liter and that a 530 would be a 3-liter, but the 530 is this 2-liter, and if you opt up for the 540, you get a 3-liter inline 6 with 375 horsepower. And that gets you from 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. So a pretty decently sporty powertrain that you can opt up for. And they haven't started producing the 540s yet, but we would rather compare the base model to the top-of-the-line model anyway. So those are essentially your starting level gas powertrains that you can get here. But let's show what you can also opt for, which is this battery electric vehicle powertrain. And if I pop the hood on this, kind of interesting, you get even more plastic, but this time it's M branded. And there's not really anything to see under here. There's not a frunk, but the more important thing is the two different electric powertrains that you can get. So starting level, you can get an i5 eDrive 40. That gets you a 335 horsepower rear electric motor. So it's rear wheel drive, and it's paired to an 81.2 kilowatt hour battery that gets you about 295 miles of range, and that's by BMW's estimate. Those aren't EPA numbers yet, but we should have those numbers soon. Now, if you want to go even up from there, then you can get into this M60. And the M60 has 593 horsepower, thanks to the addition of a 257 horsepower front motor. So those two electric motors combined give you that total system output of almost 600 horsepower. And that takes your 0 to 60 time from 5.7 to 3.7 seconds when you opt for this top dog all-wheel drive M60 electric powertrain. But you will take a little bit of hit when it comes to range, because this is rated at 256 miles of range, again BMW's estimate. So if you want to maximize the range, getting the less powerful rear-wheel drive battery system is going to be your more economical option, but who doesn't love having a good 600 horsepower? And we'll hop around here to the back, and we can talk a little bit about charging, because that's another important thing, obviously, about an electric vehicle. Now, the peak charging rate on these is 205 kilowatts, and that can get your 81.2 kilowatt hour battery from 10 to 80% charge in as little as 30 minutes, according to BMW, at a fast charger. And another nice thing about these cars is that when they become available, you will be able to get 30-minute sessions at EA stations for free for the first 2 years. So they do give you a little bit of an incentive there, which is, of course, always a nice thing to have. And yeah, 205 kilowatts of peak charging is a pretty good number. Obviously, I mean, we've seen higher, but that's enough to make a road trip pretty convenient. It's not really going to stop you in your tracks so much. Now, walking around the exteriors of both of these cars, these are both optioned with an M appearance package that give them a more sporty kind of look. So this is not truly the most base model of the 530. But the interesting thing here is, at least at a standstill, this kidney grill is not really open here on the 530. So that it has in common actually with the electric i5. But they're pretty similar front ends, now redesigned, and what they've done is they've tried to tie these front ends back a little bit into some of the classic 5 Series that have that shark nose front end. So your headlights are set back from the front of the bumper. Of course, you still have BMW's kidney grille, because every BMW does, whether gas or electric. They all have that in common. And really, the way that these cars are spec'd, aside from color, on the exterior, they honestly look pretty similar. And even walking around to the side, I mean, you can see these more expensive carbon mirror caps. That's a bit of a difference, but I mean, look at the wheels. You know, there's not really much difference there. Honestly, overall, they're fairly similar looking cars from the exterior. And we might as well go ahead and jump inside here of the 530i to show you a little bit of what you get from the interior. Now, this 530i, even though it's the base powertrain, it does not give you a very base feeling interior. I mean, this is a nice place to sit. The car feels very special. You have these dark red seats and dark red upholstery. It's a good look. You've got a nice center console here. Everything looks very high tech. It's got nice tactile feel to it. So that's all things that have been done pretty well. Of course, cup holders up front. You have your phone tray here, and really the big thing that you see on this interior is something that's making its way through BMW's lineup. This is their curved display. It's a pretty subtle curve, especially from the driver's seat. You don't necessarily notice it a ton, but it gives this dash a little bit more of a driver-focused shape. And you've got a 12.3-inch screen directly in front of you, and that gives you, of course, all of your essential information. It's very sharp. It's a good-looking display, nice colors, nice contrast. And in the center, you've got a 14.9-inch display here. So really nice screens. Everything is very responsive to the touch. And again, it's just a good-looking set of screens. But otherwise, it's fairly minimalist. You can see we've got some climate controls here built into the screen. Overall, honestly, a pretty minimalist interior. But it's a cool place to sit. We've got Bowers & Wilkins audio in here. We've got memory seats. We've got this nice flat bottom M-branded steering wheel. So there's a lot of good in this interior. I also like this big roof glass panel that you get here. It's pretty nice looking. Another thing about this new 5 Series is that they've made it longer, taller, and wider. So it's about 3.4 inches longer, 1.3 inches wider, and 1.4 inches taller. Part of that is in the wheelbase. And so it does give you, versus the previous generation car, a little bit more rear seat room. And I'm 5'10", so I'm by far not the tallest of any of my coworkers, but I've got good headroom, good leg room. I think even if it were Andre back here, especially if I made a little bit of extra room for him, I think even Andre could be comfortable. We have a bunch of USB-Cs back here. We've got our own climate vents. And honestly, the materials still are very good. We've got that same red that's on the seats here into the door card. A really cool speaker grill that's Bowers & Wilkins branded, which is really nice. I love this design, and you can see the speakers a little bit through that grill, which is pretty cool. So it's got an athletic, young kind of appearance. I think it's honestly a nice interior. It's a nice place to sit. And we'll show you the trunk as well, just because it's important. It's pretty deep in terms of how far forward it goes, but it doesn't have a ton of depth to it. And you can pull this up a little bit and you can see some of what's under here. You've got your spare tire there, Always a nice thing to have. Yeah, nothing much else. It's interesting to me that they do a power close on the trunk. It seems a little unnecessary to me. I mean, it's a nice luxury feature to have, but I don't feel like it's as necessary in a sedan as maybe it is in a crossover. Something else, just a random little bit that I want to mention, but is kind of interesting, is that these cameras here that are part of this car's safety system are really not hidden at all. It's got a very clear little loft apartment that lives up there at the top of your windshield, which is interesting. A lot of times those sensors are kind of hidden, but you can see them very clearly on these cars. Now let's also jump in the interior of this M60, because this, like I mentioned, is the top of the line. This is much more expensive, and we'll talk about price. Much more expensive than that 530, and honestly, from the interior, it doesn't necessarily show. I mean, again, it's still a nice interior. It was a nice interior in the 530. It's still a nice interior in here, but similar in a lot of ways. It is a little bit nicer. You can see we've got a stripe here as your center line on the steering wheel. We've got the M colors stitched onto the inside of the wheel. So even though that 530 has a flat bottom M branded steering wheel, this one has it, but a little bit nicer. You can see the same curved display that you get on the more base model. I mean, it's a very similar, very comparable interior. Spec'd a little differently. We don't have red seats in here. We've got white seats, which I love. It gives the cabin a little bit more of an airy feeling, but that's all just down to how you decide to spec the vehicle, right? I mean, that's really up to you as a consumer. So as many differences as that car and this car have, the interior, kind of like the exterior, is not one of the more dramatic differences between them. But there should be a pretty notable difference in how they drive. So let's jump back in the 530 here and take it down the road real quick, just so we can show you how this car accelerates and how it feels. Because of course, a gas versus an electric powertrain, those two are going to be fairly different. Now, to start the car, you've got a button there. This is your drive selector. So you click that back, and now we are in drive. Now, this is a pretty quiet car. The cabin doesn't let a lot of road noise in. So unless you listen carefully, you would almost think that maybe this one is also electric, because yeah, it doesn't make a lot of noise. And we'll still have to see how the 540 drives, because again, those cars aren't quite into production yet, but when they are, it should have even a different driving experience from this 530. And you get on the throttle in this car, and it's not slow. I mean, 255 horsepower is decent. And to someone who isn't a car person, I think you would be, very satisfied with the amount of acceleration that you get out of this powertrain. Now, driving the M60, this is a different story entirely, because, hold on, if I punch it, whoa, it really throws you back in the seat. This is impressive acceleration, as you would expect. I mean, any car that's going to give you 593 horsepower is going to be impressive to accelerate in. The other cool thing that I've got here is I've got this lever that puts me into a boost mode. So if I hold it, you can see this count here, and I get even more acceleration. I mean, if you want a car that can scare people when you hit the throttle, this is one of them. It is very, very quick. But otherwise, I mean, it's a relatively similar car to the 530 to drive. That feels like the biggest difference. Of course, you don't have the sensation of a combustion engine as the background of this car operating. But otherwise, as far as I can tell here on these slower back roads, they do feel fairly similar. There is, however, a big difference in the weight of these two vehicles. So that 530i xDrive is a little over 4,000 pounds. It's 4,158 pounds. This M60 is 5,247 pounds. So it's more than 1,000 pounds heavier. and definitely on some really nice twisty roads, you're gonna feel that difference. I mean, 1,000 pounds is a lot of extra weight. The other big difference that we have to talk about is the difference that you'll see in price. So the 530i's start around $59,000, including destination and some other fees, but of course there's going to be additional fees depending on what dealership you go to, so figure MSRP around $59,000. If you want to step up to the 540i, which gets you quite a bit of extra power, then that can get you up into the about $66,000 range. If you want to get the more base electric powertrain, which is the eDrive 40, that's going to come in around $68,000, and then this M60 with its impressive 593 horsepower is going to start around $85,000. So there's a big weight difference, and like I mentioned, there's a big price difference. Whether or not that's worth it to you is just going to depend on what you're looking for in a vehicle. I have to say, I'm very much enjoying driving this M60. It's hard not to. Any car that's got 600 horsepower, it's bound to be fun. And yeah, I would be interested to get this on some twisty roads, especially out in Colorado, and see how it really handles in some fun mountain driving conditions, because yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, BMWs are also about that. So let me know what you all think down in the comments below. Which version of the 5 Series would be the one that you would go for if you're in the market for one? And that's all for this video. Go to alltfl.com for all of our coverage on everything BMW and more, and we'll see you in the next video.